The desert wind carries with it whispers soft, persistent murmurs of things long buried but never forgotten. In a lonely stretch of land, miles from the nearest town, stands a weathered cabin. It is here that the story begins, not with the man's name, but with the silence that surrounds him. The locals call him a ghost, a relic from a darker time. He rides into town only when necessity demands food. Bullets, whiskey, and even then, eyes follow him. Voices hush. There's something about his presence, something that reminds people of stories they'd rather not recall. His name is Silas, though to most it's just a name from rumors once spoken with a mix of fear and pity. His hands, scarred and calloused, tell of a man who's seen too much blood. A faint line traces his cheekbone, a reminder of a knife fight that nearly ended him. Yet, those are the visible wounds. The deeper ones, those etched into his soul, remain hidden beneath the weight of a solitude. He once rode with men whose reputations could silence a saloon with a single glance. They were outlaws, killers dressed as cowboys, and Silas, once their best, had done things the world wouldn't forgive years ago. One fateful night changed everything. A fire, gunshots, the echo of a woman's scream. No one really knows what happened, but Silas disappeared after that night, leaving behind a trail of bodies and unanswered questions. The legend grew as the years passed, painting him as both villain and victim. To some, he was a man who couldn't escape his sins. To others, a man betrayed by his own sense of justice. Whatever the truth, it chained him to his past like iron shackles. Now, his days are spent in the quiet company of regret. The mornings begin with the crackle of a fire, the creak of wood beneath his boots, and the distant cry of crows that seem to mock his isolation. He mends fences, chops wood, and avoids looking at the mirror too long in the stillness of the night. When the wind howls across the plains, he sometimes imagines hearing voices, those of the men he killed, or perhaps of the ones he couldn't save. He tells himself it's just the wind. But deep down, he knows better. Every scar is a story, and every story is a reminder the past clings to him like dust, refusing to be brushed away when strangers come too close. He feels the old instincts return, the sharp awareness, the silent calculation of threat. He doesn't want to fight anymore. But the man he used to be still lives somewhere inside him, restless, waiting. It's the curse of survival. You can leave the battlefield, but the battlefield never truly leaves you. Silas has made peace with his solitude, or at least pretends to. It's safer that way. The fewer people he meets, the fewer chances his past has to catch up. Yet even in his self-imposed exile, the question lingers like a wound that refuses to heal. Can a man truly outrun his past, or will it forever define him? The truth is as harsh as the land he lives in. You can ride as far as you like, change your name, bury your guns, but some things don't stay buried. Memories, regrets, the echo of a trigger pulled too late or too soon. They follow step for step through every sunrise and every sleepless night. And though Silas hopes redemption might be waiting somewhere beyond the horizon, he knows deep down that the past doesn't just haunt, it echoes louder each time you try to forget. His story isn't over, but the ghosts have already written the beginning. The days had begun to blend into one another, quiet, predictable, lifeless, until she arrived. Her name was Alara, and she appeared as if carried by the wind itself, soft-spoken, fragile in presence, yet with an undercurrent of quiet resilience that Silas couldn't ignore. The first time he saw her, she was struggling to guide a skittish horse down the dirt path near his ranch. The creature had thrown a shoe, and the girl, dressed in worn clothes and carrying more exhaustion than belongings, was clearly out of place. In the harsh landscape of the frontier, Silas didn't mean to stop. He'd long ago sworn off getting involved in anyone's troubles, but something about her, perhaps the determined way she fought against fear, or the sadness in her eyes made him pull his horse to a halt when he offered help. His voice came out rough, a sound that startled even him. Alara hesitated, studying him with wary eyes. She'd heard the stories too of the man who lived alone in the hills, whose past was whispered in saloons like a cautionary tale. Yet there was something in his gaze, a flicker of decency buried beneath the roughness, that told her he wasn't the monster they made him out to be. Their first encounters were marked by distance and caution. Silas repaired her horse's shoe, offered her water, and expected her to be gone by morning, but she stayed a little longer, just long enough to repay his kindness by helping tend his garden or patch a torn shirt. It was a strange, fragile rhythm that formed between them, two broken souls orbiting the edge of something neither fully understood. Silas spoke little, his words gruff and practical, while Alara filled the silence with gentle conversation about the world beyond the desert, about music, the scent of spring flowers, and stories of kindness that felt foreign to him. Her presence unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. She belonged to a world of light, laughter, and warmth, while he was the product of shadow and regret. Her hands were soft where his were scarred. Her voice trembled where his was cold and steady, yet the contrast didn't drive them apart, it drew them closer. Like sunlight warming frost, Silas found himself listening when she spoke, drawn not to her words but to the sound of them, the simple beauty of another human voice in a place long haunted by silence. For Alara, Silas was both terrifying and intriguing. His eyes held the weight of storms. Yet there were moments when she caught glimpses of something else, something tender, buried deep beneath years of guilt. When he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him linger by the fence at dusk, staring toward the horizon with an expression that spoke of longing and loss. It made her wonder what kind of pain he carried, and whether kindness could reach a man who no longer believed he deserved it. The connection that grew between them was delicate, fragile as glass. One wrong word could shatter it. Silas knew that letting her stay was dangerous, not for her safety, but for his own. She reminded him of everything he'd lost: trust, love, hope. Yet every morning when he saw her tending the fire or humming softly while mending his old coat, a warmth stirred in him that he hadn't felt in years. It terrified him more than any gunfight ever could. In her innocence, Alara didn't try to fix him. She simply existed beside him, bringing quiet light to a place that had known only darkness, and though neither spoke of it aloud, both could feel the change, the slow, cautious unfreezing of a man's heart and the awakening of something pure and impossible. Between two souls the world had forgotten. It was fragile, uncertain, and wholly undeserved, but it was hope. And that was something Silas hadn't believed in for a very long time. For a time, Silas believed he could bury the past beneath the dust of the desert life with Alara, quiet and unspoken, had almost convinced him that redemption was possible, that perhaps a man could outlive his sins. But peace built on secrets is fragile, and the past has a way of finding those who try hardest to forget it. It began one scorching afternoon when a rider appeared on the horizon, trailing dust like smoke from a dying fire. Silas sensed the change in the air before the stranger even reached the gate. The man rode with purpose, his eyes sharp and his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. When he spoke Silas's name, it wasn't in greeting, it was an accusation. The visitor was no friend, but a remnant of a life Silas had hoped was gone forever. The stranger's words cut like blades. He spoke of debts unpaid, of men Silas had left behind in a burning town years ago. He spoke of blood, too much of it, and of a woman who died because of choices Silas made. Alara stood nearby, frozen in place, her basket of herbs slipping from her hands as the truth began to unravel before her. Silas didn't deny it. There was no point. The man's every word was a mirror reflecting what he'd tried so desperately to hide. He had been a killer, an outlaw, a man whose name once inspired terror. His hands now trembling slightly, had taken lives. He'd convinced himself that walking away from that life had erased the stains, but they were still there. As vivid as the scars on his skin, Alora's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, the man she'd grown to trust. The one who had shown her quiet kindness and guarded warmth suddenly seemed like a stranger. The gentle eyes she'd come to find comfort in were the same eyes that had once looked down the barrel of a gun, fear fluttered through her like cold wind, sharp, undeniable. But beneath it was something else, a disbelief mingled with sorrow. Could this really be the same man who had offered her safety and care when the stranger left? Vowing that Silas's past would never stay buried, silence fell heavier than any gunshot. Alara could hardly meet Silas's gaze. The air between them felt cracked and brittle. As though one word might shatter what they'd built together, Silas didn't beg for forgiveness. He merely nodded, his expression worn and empty. "Now you know," he said quietly. His voice breaking with the weight of years. Alara turned away. Tears filling her eyes, every instinct told her to run, to flee from the darkness that had just been revealed. Yet something held her back. She remembered the way Silas had helped her when he owed her nothing. The way he'd treated her with patience and gentleness in a world that had shown her only cruelty. He had saved her once. And though his past was drenched in blood, his present was built on something different, repentance. Even if he didn't dare call it that. That night, she sat outside beneath the stars, trying to make sense of the man she now knew. Could someone truly change? Could light and darkness exist in the same soul? When Silas finally joined her, there was no explanation left to give. Only truth and choice. "I won't hide from what I've done," he said, his voice steady now. "If you need to go, I'll understand." Alara looked at him, the fear still there, but mingled now with something stronger, understanding. "I can't forget what you've done," she whispered. "But I can see who you are now, in that fragile moment." The line between past and present blurred. She didn't offer absolution, only a choice to stay. To face the storm with him. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was hope. And for a man like Silas, that was more than he ever believed he'd deserve. The morning after the truth was laid bare, the silence between Silas and Alara was not one of resentment. It was one of reckoning. Both had stood at a crossroads. And though neither spoke of it aloud, a decision had been made. She had chosen to stay, and he, in turn, had chosen to change, not just in thought. But indeed, what lay ahead of them was not the promise of peace, but the slow, difficult labor of earning it for Silas. Redemption was no grand gesture. It was a series of quiet, deliberate acts that demanded humility. He began by tearing down the walls, both the literal fence that guarded his property and the invisible one that had long surrounded his heart. Each morning, before the sun broke over the hills, he would work the land with renewed purpose. The once abandoned ranch began to breathe again. Weeds cleared, soil turned, corral mended. Every nail he drove into the wood felt like a confession. Every seed planted a prayer that something good might still grow from barren ground. Alara, though still haunted by what she had learned, found strength in her decision to believe in the man Silas was becoming. It wasn't easy. At times she would catch him lost in thought, his eyes distant, shadowed by guilt. But instead of turning away, she began to reach out, a gentle word here, a shared meal there. When he flinched from her touch, she didn't retreat. She simply waited, patient as spring waiting for thaw. Their progress was slow. Fragile as new glass, trust, they discovered, was not rebuilt through promises but through presence. When storms rolled across the plains and lightning split the sky, Silas stood guard by the window while Alara slept, determined to protect what little peace they had found. When her horse fell ill, he stayed awake through the night, whispering soft reassurances to her as she wept beside the animal. These were not the actions of the outlaw he once was. They were the acts of a man learning, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to care. Small victories began to take root. Elara laughed again softly at first, then freely. The sound startled Silas the first time he heard it. It reminded him of music, something pure and unspoiled by pain. And when she taught him to play an old song on the harmonica she'd carried since childhood, his rough, uncertain notes filled the cabin with something that felt dangerously close to joy still. The journey was not without hardship. The nearby town remained wary of him. Whispers followed them when they rode in for supplies. A few men spat in his direction. Others crossed the street to avoid him. Each time, Alara's hand found his, steady and unflinching. Her belief in him became his shield, though he never asked for it. In her eyes, he began to see not just who he was, but who he could be as the months passed. Their home transformed. Once barren land now held rows of sprouting crops. The cabin's porch, once silent, now echoed with shared laughter and quiet conversation beneath the stars. Together they built something that neither had thought possible, a life not defined by fear or regret, but by daily acts of faith. Silas knew that forgiveness was not a finish line. It was a road he would walk for the rest of his days, but he no longer walked it alone. And though the past would always be a shadow at their backs, the light they had found together burned bright enough to push it away in the fragile rhythm of their day's shared work. Quiet evenings, whispered hopes, something enduring took shape. Love, no longer a fleeting spark, became a steady flame against all odds. Two broken souls were learning to build, not from what they had lost, but from what they were brave enough to begin a new life. The peace Silas and Elara had built, fragile as it was, could not exist untouched by the echoes of the world beyond their small ranch. Redemption, as Silas had come to learn, is never freely given. It must be tested. Proven through trial. That test came one dusky evening when the horizon burned with the last light of day, and the sound of distant hoofbeats carried across the plains like the beating of a war drum. An old enemy had returned, not a ghost this time, but flesh and blood, a man who had once ridden beside Silas during the darkest days of his outlaw life, Gabe Rourke, a name that still stirred unease in his chest. Gabe had been there the night everything fell apart, the night of fire. Blood and betrayal had survived, though Silas had thought otherwise, and now he was back to collect what he believed was owed, vengeance. When Gabe dismounted at the gate, rifle slung over his shoulder, Silas knew there would be no running. He'd spent years fleeing from this moment, from the reckoning that was bound to come, but now he had something to fight for, not pride, not reputation, but peace. The fragile life he'd built with Elara. Elara watched from the doorway. Fear etched across her face. She wanted to run to him, to beg him not to fight. But she understood something vital. This was not just a confrontation between two men. This was Silas's final battle with the man he used to be. If he turned away now, he would remain haunted forever. The standoff unfolded beneath a blood-red sky. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two men faced each other, one hardened by hate, the other tempered by regret. Gabe's words were venomous, filled with old pain. You think you can wash your hands clean, Silas? Men like us don't get redemption. Silas's voice was calm, steady. Maybe not, but I can choose who I am from here on. The moment stretched thin as a wire. A gun was drawn. The sound of the shot shattered the silence. But when the dust settled, it wasn't Silas who lay bleeding, it was Gabe. Silas had fired only to defend, not to kill, and the bullet had struck low, sparing his life. Kneeling beside the man who had once been his brother in arms, Silas pressed his hand to the wound, not in anger but in mercy. Let it end here, he said softly. We've both done enough damage. It was a choice, a breaking of the cycle that had defined him. The act of sparing a life, rather than taking one, was the final step in his long road toward redemption. Elara rushed to his side, tears in her eyes, and together they watched as the last light faded from the sky, giving way to stars that seemed brighter than ever before in that moment. Something shifted. The man who had once been defined by violence and guilt was gone, replaced by one who understood the power of forgiveness. Both given and received. Ilara's hand found his, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You didn't just save him, Silas. You saved yourself." In the days that followed, life returned to its gentle rhythm. The scars of that night would remain, as all scars do. But they were no longer wounds, they were reminders. Silas no longer feared his past. He carried it as one carries an old photograph, painful to look at, but proof of how far he'd come. As dawn broke one morning, Silas stood at the fence overlooking the open range. The wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of new blossoms. Behind him, Ilara's laughter rang out, a sound that, once rare, now belonged to their every day. He smiled faintly, feeling something he hadn't in years. Peace. Redemption, he realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to use its weight as foundation, not burden. And as he took Ilara's hand, the rising sun casting golden light across their home, Silas finally understood forgiveness wasn't freedom from who he had been, it was the courage to become who he was meant to be.